The revisionist Western, The Outlaw Josey Wales, came to theaters in 1976 and was a huge hit. The movie is directed and stars Clint Eastwood, and this Oscar-nominated hit portrays him as a Missouri farmer who seeks revenge for the murder of his family. Later, he makes his way west after the Civil War, determined to live a useful and helpful life. He joins up with a group of endangered settlers who need the protection that a man as tough and experienced as he is can provide. Unfortunately, his past catches up with him, and Josey is now an outlaw. This film is considered a must-see by many Western fans, and one of those fans is famed director Orson Welles. The movie was inspired by a 1972 novel by supposedly Cherokee writer Forrest Carter. That wasn't the writer's real name. His real name was Asa Earl Carter. Asa Carter was a former speechwriter for the governor of Alabama, George Wallace. And all this came out with the popularity of the film and kind of put a tarnish on it somewhat. In June of 1975, it was announced that Clint Eastwood would star in the film, with a scheduled bicentennial celebration release date. Principal photography began on October 6th in Lake Powell and in nearby Peoria, Utah. Michael Cimino and Philip Kaufman oversaw the writing of the script and the screenplay adaptation from the novel. The cinematographer Bruce Surtees and James Fargo scouted for locations to shoot the film well before they had a final script. They decided to choose Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, and Oroville, California for their shoot. Now, it was pretty obvious that Clint Eastwood and the screenwriter Kaufman developed a pretty sour relationship during this film, and they were bumping heads quite a bit. Kaufman insisted on filming with meticulous attention to detail, and this caused numerous disagreements with Eastwood. The other thing that caused problems with them is they both shared an attraction to Sondra Locke, and it was pretty obvious at the time that Eastwood and Locke were developing a relationship, and Kaufman didn't like that idea. He had his eyes on her also, and this was about to transform into some major headbutting. One evening, Kaufman insisted on finding a beer can as a prop to be used in one of the scenes. But while he was absent, Clint Eastwood ordered the cinematographer to quickly shoot the scene as light was fading from the set. Then Eastwood left before Kaufman ever returned. On the 24th of October, 1975, Kaufman was fired at Clint Eastwood's command by producer Bob Daly. This firing caused outrage among the Directors Guild of America and other important Hollywood executives, since the director had already worked really hard on the film, including completion of all the pre-production work. Pressure mounted extremely on Warner Brothers and on Eastwood to back down from this action, and their refusal to do so resulted in them being fined. This resulting situation is the reason that the Directors Guild passed a new rule known as the Eastwood Rule, which prohibits an actor or producer from firing the director and then personally taking on the director role. From that point on, the film was directed by Eastwood himself, with Daly as second in command. According to the famed music producer David Geffen, Clint Eastwood's tough reputation is well-deserved. When Geffen was a young executive at Warner Brothers, one of his assignments was to give notes on screenings of this movie. All of the other Warner Brothers executives were unanimous in their praise for this movie. Geffen liked the movie, but he told Eastwood that perhaps this movie could be shortened a little bit, by about half an hour. And Eastwood calmly told him that if he wanted the picture shortened by that much time, then he would need to do it himself. Giffen then asked Eastwood where he would be later on, to which Eastwood turned to him and replied, "I'll be across the street at Paramount cutting a new deal." After that point, Giffen was never asked to sit in on another Eastwood movie again. Now, because of Chief Dan George's age, he would have trouble remembering his lines. So during the takes, Clint Eastwood would begin to mouth his lines without realizing it, and he had to be told to stop because it would ruin the take. Eastwood said that he would have people drill Dan George on his lines to try to help him get them down. But when it came time to shoot the scene, Eastwood learned to say to him, "Chief, just forget about the lines. Tell me the story about the man who rode over the hill." And Dan George, who was apparently a natural storyteller and had the gift of gab at heart, would continue on to tell a perfect story that matched his lines. Now, in the novel itself, Josie and Laura marry and have a son named Jamie. This storyline was left out of the screenplay and the movie because Clint Eastwood was against the idea of ending up being domesticated in one of his films. Now, this is the movie that supposedly Clint Eastwood got so frustrated with a horse that just wouldn't cooperate that he punched the horse in the jaw. I've read this numerous times, so I believe this really did happen. It probably hurt his fist more than it did the horse. Now, this film contains some of the most wild horse scenes ever recorded that were actually kept in a movie. Two scenes in particular stand out. At the beginning of the cabin shootout, a horse jumps the stream and doesn't stick his landing. As a result, you watch him skate on his front legs for at least 20 to 30 feet. The second one, about 3 minutes later, one of the women shoots at 3 guys on the side of a hill, thereby knocking them off their mounts. The people and the horses then slide down the hill all the way to the bottom. A lot of times these things would get edited out, but in this movie they decided to leave it in. Clint Eastwood's character has 2 main handguns that are Colt Walker 1847 revolvers. They each hold 6 .44 caliber ball shots. This weapon featured larger cylinder chambers to allow more powder to be placed in the gun, thus making them a lot more powerful. The problem with this style of gun, and the one drawback to it, was that it had very weak cylinder walls. If one broke, the whole weapon would blow up on the person holding it. Now, Sondra Locke writes in one of her books that she was just madly in love with Clint Eastwood, and was so from the time of their very first date in Page, Arizona. She stated that physically she thought he was the most gorgeous man that she had ever seen, that he had a terribly heroic face, and his muscular build just added to the charm. She states that these original moments with Clint in the first few years were sheer magic. Together they seemed like they were 2 people that were meant to be, that worked in perfect accord with each other. That didn't stay the case forever, though. Now, Sondra Locke by herself was an exceptional actor. She went on to be a great producer and director, along with being a talented singer. But it was her own destiny to be forever linked to Clint Eastwood. This partnership ran from the mid-1970s to the late 1980s. She was a very sexy, charismatic performer with a tough, lean look when she starred alongside Eastwood in hit movies like The Outlaw Josey Wales, The Gauntlet, Every Which Way But Loose, and Bronco Billy. Clint Eastwood and Sondra Locke got trapped in one of the most notorious toxic relationships in Hollywood history. It was an ugly overlap of the personal and professional life of these 2 people. It was a case of love gone sour and mentorship gone terribly wrong. A lot of folks feel like that she would have been a lot better off had she never had a personal relationship with one of Hollywood's biggest stars. This girl was very talented on her own, and she could have left a sizable footprint in Hollywood. Now, the character that she plays of Laura Lee is supposed to be 22 years old in the novel. Sondra Locke was really 31 when she played this role, and she had turned 32 by the time of the film's release. The character of Josey Wales is supposed to be 32 years old in the novel. Clint Eastwood was in reality 45 when he played the role of Josey. Upon its release in August of 1976, The Outlaw Josey Wales was widely acclaimed by the critics, and they saw Eastwood's role as an iconic one in this film. It was one of the few Western films to receive critical and commercial success in the 1970s. You see, it was at that time that the Western was thought to be dying as a major force in Hollywood. Clint Eastwood called this certainly one of his highest moments in his career in the Western genre. Take a look at this movie again. I think you'll thoroughly enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.